What are some best books you have ever read? One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I'll never forget reading this book. Even if you've seen the film adaptation, which is wonderful, the book is incredible. It's written from the first-person POV of one of the patients admitted to the psych ward. The entirety of the book, you have to define what is real and what is not real. You constantly question the validity of the narrator and what he's seeing. The interesting thing about the whole perspective is the book is really about another character, but you get to see, learn, and interact with that character and the rest of them through the eyes of a narrator. A mute psych patient. There's an incredible amount of detail. Because the narrator is a mute, he can focus on his observation and inner thoughts. A great read. I would highly recommend it.
I've read that book too. The way it dives into the mind of the narrator is unique. You really start to question what's real and what's not. The focus on the mute character gives it a different angle. It's like you're piecing together a puzzle while trying to figure out the main character's journey. It's interesting how you can connect with everyone's struggles through one person's perspective. Definitely worth reading.
Catch 22 by Joseph Heller. I gave up the first time I tried to read it. After starting again and finishing it, I seriously loved it. Best book out there. Also works by Kurt Vonnegut. Slaughterhouse-Five, Cat's Cradle, Breakfast of Champions. Thoroughly enjoyed all of them. Have Mother Night waiting to be read.
I get that. Catch 22 can be tough at first, but once you get through it, it's pretty rewarding. Heller has a unique style that really captures the absurdity of war. I also like Vonnegut's work. Slaughterhouse-Five has this wild way of weaving time and trauma together. It's interesting how different books resonate with us over time. Let me know how Mother Night goes when you get to it.
Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy hands down is my favorite. Incredibly dark, but the prose and imagery blow me away every time. And that ending, man, that ending. Edit well. First time I've had a post blow up. Glad there's so many others that love this one. PM me suggestions based on this one if you feel up to it.
I get that. It's a heavy read, but the writing really sticks with you. I've had similar experiences with books that take a darker turn. There's something about those stories that just hits differently. You might find some good recommendations in the comments too. It's cool to connect with others who appreciate that kind of depth. Always interesting to see what others suggest based on similar tastes.
I really enjoyed Lamb by Christopher Moore. A lighthearted, sacrilegious take on what happened during Jesus' formative years, as told through the lens of his best friend. Lots of laughs, as well as some really touching moments and some nice philosophical musings. Really great read for anyone that doesn't take religion too seriously.
That sounds interesting. I've heard mixed things about it. It's cool when a book can blend humor with deeper ideas. I think stories like that can make you think about things in a new way. If it's lighthearted and doesn't take itself too seriously, it might be a nice change from heavier reads. I might add it to my reading list.
Magical realism type fiction, everything is illuminated. Jonathan Safran, For 100 Years of Solitude. Marquez, The History of Love. Nicole Krauss, All the Light We Cannot See. Anthony Doran, Naked Singularity. Sergio de la Pava, Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. For Poisonwood Bible. Barbara Kingsolver, The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde. Junot Diaz, Sci-Fi, Time Enough for Love. Heinlein, Stranger in a Strange Land. Heinlein Inter-Series. Orson Scott. Card Foundation Trilogy. Isaac Asimov, Dune. Obviously, I'll also read anything by Michael Crichton, Chuck Palahniuk, Dan Brown, or John Grisham as very enjoyable quickies. They're a bit more plot-centric than some of the other stuff that I enjoy, that I think of as more artistic but still awesome. Also catch 22. Edit. I love all the feedback. Thank you for the book recommendations. I'm making quite an order for books today. If you love these books as well, Please recommend more. Or just discuss, smiley face.
Sounds like you're diving into some solid reads. I remember a buddy who got hooked on sci-fi after we read Dune together. He started spending all his free time at the bookstore, finding gems he never knew existed. He even tried to write his own short stories based on the worlds we explored. It was cool to see how a good book can really inspire someone to create more. Hope you find some new favorites too.
Ender's Game was one of the first books I really got into, but I think I like the sequel, Speaker for the Dead, even more. It's a great story about the strained relationships that arise between different cultures, and there's even a bit of a mystery element as well. The other sequels kind of flew off the rails in my opinion, but Speaker was a fantastic follow-up that I'd recommend to fans of the original.
I remember when I first read Ender's Game too. It was pretty captivating. Then I picked up Speaker for the Dead, and it took me by surprise. The way it explores cultural differences is pretty deep. I get what you mean about the other sequels. They weren't as strong. But Speaker definitely stands out as a solid continuation of the story. It's worth a read for sure.
David Mitchell, Cloud Atlas William Gibson, Neuromancer Joseph Heller, Catch, 22 Vladimir Nabokov, Lolita Tom Clancy, Red Storm Rising James Michener, Tales of the South Pacific Niccolo Machiavelli, The Prince Neil Stevenson, Snow Crash Cormac McCarthy, The Road Edit. I'll buy gold for whoever can guess what I'm currently reading. Edit. I was reading Henry David Thoreau's Walden. Good book, smiley face.
That's a mix of classics and some heavy themes. Funny how books can transport you. I remember reading Catch-22 during a long flight. It felt like a trip in itself with all the twists and absurdities. You get lost in the characters and their troubles, yet it all feels familiar in a weird way. Thoreau's Walden brings a different vibe though. It's about simplicity and nature. Curious what you think about it.
Here are some of my favorite, in no particular order, Ender's Game. Orson Scott Card the Giver, Lois Lowry Lord of the Flies, William Golding The Hobbit J.R.R., Tolkien The Lord of the Rings J.R.R., Tolkien The Stand, Stephen King The Dark Tower series, Stephen King To Kill a Mockingbird, Harper Lee The Outsiders S.E. Hinton.
These books cover a lot of ground. I remember reading The Giver back in school. It really made me think about choices and how important emotions are. Then there's Ender's Game, which sparked my interest in strategy. It's funny how a story can shape your perspective or just entertain you. I guess that's what makes reading so valuable. Each book kind of stays with you, you know?
All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. The writing in this book is some of the most beautiful writing I've ever read. Doerr translates in one sentence what would take most authors' pages to convey. The writing almost has a musical quality to it. It's magic. It is a large book at 500+ pages, but there's not one slow spot. I finished the entire thing in 2 days.
I get why people rave about beautiful writing. Sometimes a book just clicks, and you can't put it down. It's cool when an author can say so much in just a few words. I once read a really long novel in a weekend too. You just get lost in it, and time flies by. Those moments are special, especially when a story pulls you in like that.
My personal top: On Heroes and Tombs, Ernesto Sabato the Clown, Heinrich Boll Slaughterhouse-5, Kurt Vonnegut the Master and Margarita, Mikhail Bulgakov the Magus, John Fowles' Conversation in the Cathedral, Mario Vargas Llosa the Tin Drum, Gunter Grass Blindness, Jose Saramago Asoyev, George R.R. Martin Edit. Forgot how much I like The Picture of Dorian Gray.
That's a solid list. Each book brings something different, but they all explore deep themes. Slaughterhouse-5 has a unique take on time and war, while The Master and Margarita mixes fantasy with reality in an interesting way. I think The Picture of Dorian Gray is fascinating for its exploration of vanity and morality. Makes you think about how far you'd go for beauty or youth. Quite the diverse mix of literature there.
Top 10 Books 1. Slaughterhouse-5, Kurt Vonnegut 2. Johnny Got His Gun, Dalton Trumbo 3. Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, Robert Pirsig 4. Little Women, Louisa May Alcott 5. The Unbearable Lightness of Being, Milan Kundera 6. Lord of the Flies, William Golding 7. Va, Sebastian Junge 8. Voyage of the Dawn Treader, Chronicles of Narnia, C.S. Lewis 9. The Awakening, Kate Chopin 10. For Whom the Bell Tolls, Ernest Hemingway.
I remember discussing books with a friend who had a pretty diverse taste. We agreed that Slaughterhouse-5 was a standout, blending war and time travel in a unique way. My friend loved how Little Women offered a different perspective on family. We often debated Lord of the Flies and its take on human nature. It was cool to see how literature can spark so many different conversations and insights.
The Once and Future King by T.H. While I've always been a fan of the myriad of retellings of the legends of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, but honestly, I've never read a better version than this one. I first listened to it as a book on tape when I was working all day in a dimly lit, windowless warehouse, and it transported out of my daily drudgery into the fields of medieval England. Years later, I reread it in text form and loved it twice as much. It manages to condense the epic story into 4 fantastic volumes and really brings a sense of humanity to each stage of King Arthur's life, from childhood to spoilers, right before his death. It also does a fantastic job of characterizing the ensemble cast, such as Lancelot, Guinevere, and people always ask me if I prefer Gandalf or Dumbledore, and I always answer Merlin. Even Robin Hood features as a side character. I also recommend The Mists of Avalon, which is a great feminist retelling of the King Arthur mythos, which I read as a follow-up.
I can relate to that feeling of being pulled into a different world. A while back, I was stuck in a mundane routine too. I picked up a fantasy novel, and it completely changed my perspective for days. The characters felt real, and their struggles were so relatable. It's amazing how a good story can make you forget everything around you. Definitely planning to check out The Mists of Avalon now.
It's kind of funny how some non-pop culture titles are mentioned by quite a lot of people. I've seen some of my favorites already in this thread, like The Master and Margarita, Mikhail Bulgakov and Slaughterhouse-5, Kurt Vonnegut. I do also love just as much Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, Limits and Renewals by Rudyard Kipling, Bestiario by Julio Cortázar, and, to mention some from my home country, Nacht über der Prairie, Night Over the Prairie, by Lieselot Welskop Fenrir Traumnovelle by Arthur Schnitzler Die Rauber, The Robbers by Friedrich Schiller, Faust by J.W.V. Goethe.
It's interesting how some lesser-known books resonate with many. I remember a friend of mine who couldn't stop talking about The Master and Margarita. I read it and found it pretty captivating, too. We even discussed Pride and Prejudice over coffee, debating the characters' motives. It's moments like these that make book recommendations feel genuine, connecting background stories and shared thoughts around pages. Simple exchanges that stick with you.
If you went to my Goodreads page, you would see these as my favorites based on their ratings. A Walk in the Woods, the book Thief, Fahrenheit 451 Foundation. I really need to finish the trilogy, City of Thieves, Shades of Grey by Jasper Fforde. Not the other book, Ender's Game, and then There Were None to Kill, A Mockingbird Kite, Runner Gone Girl. So that's a snapshot of the books that I gave 5/5 on Goodreads. I would probably sub in All the Light We Cannot See, Storied Life of A.J. Fickery, which also received 5s. A lot of books aren't listed because I have yet to rate them because I want to reread them. Once I do reread them, they would probably be on that list /receive fives. These are books like Dune, Brave New World, and other classics, and often recommend books in these type of threads. On mobile, so sorry for any typos /formatting mistakes.
Got a friend who's really into books too. We swap recommendations all the time. I remember when he pushed me to read A Walk in the Woods. It was solid, made me think about hiking. Then he introduced me to The Book Thief, which is just a different vibe. We talk about how classics like To Kill a Mockingbird never get old. Good times over shared reads. It's nice to find those connections.
Check out /r/ Suggest Me a Book, Lord of the Rings, Tolkien The Hobbit, Tolkien Pillars of the Earth, followed the autobiography of Henry VIII, George A World Lit Only by Fire, Manchester Foundation Series, Asimov Job, A Comedy of Justice, Heinlein Pet Cemetery, King Animal, Vegetable, Miracle, Kingsolver Grapes of Wrath, Steinbeck Jacques Le Fatalist, Diderot Hitchhiker's Guide, Adams Watership Down, Adams so many more.
I remember a time when my friend decided to dive into classic literature. He picked up The Hobbit first. Just a few pages in, he was completely hooked. We talked about it for hours. He loved how Tolkien built this entire world. Eventually, he tackled The Grapes of Wrath, which hit him pretty hard. He said the struggles in the book felt real and relevant. It was cool seeing him connect with those stories.
Shogun by James Clavell is the best long read and overall book I've ever read. The book is massive, and yet, at the end, you just want more. All about the first Englishman to land in feudal Japan. Incredible. Read it. Trust me. Close runner-up is my favorite book from when I was a child. Awake and Dreaming by Kit Pearson. Touching story, enjoyable characters, and good writing, readable as an adult. Tells a good story about fantasy versus reality, and pulls in a bit of neat fantastical storytelling without being at all about magic or fantasy. A young girl living in Vancouver with her impoverished mom is sent to live on Vancouver Island with her aunt for a while. On the ferry to the island, she makes a wish that changes her life. Oh, and The Postmortal by Drew Magary makes an honorable mention. Excellent story about what happens to humans after the cure for death by aging is discovered.
I get it. Shogun really pulls you into that world. It's impressive how it manages to keep you hooked, right? I can see why you'd want more after finishing it. Then there's Awake and Dreaming. That one really had a unique take on the blend of reality and dreams. It's interesting how stories like that can resonate at different ages. And yeah, The Postmortal sounds like a thought-provoking read. Good choices all around.
If you like English history, I can thoroughly recommend A Time Traveler's Guide to Medieval England. The author, Ian Mortimer, talks about medieval England as though you're planning a visit there, giving you advice, warnings, and lots of meaty historical information. It's a fantastic and unique approach that serves as an incredibly informative and thoroughly entertaining read. It's not easy to find that combination all too often.
I haven't read that book, but it sounds interesting. I like when history is presented in a relatable way. It's cool to think about what it would be like to travel back and experience that period firsthand. Getting practical advice along with historical facts is a nice touch. Sometimes, those unique approaches to storytelling make a huge difference. It's not always easy to find books that hit both the informative and entertaining marks.
Really enjoyed the following books. The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern, Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn Norwegian, Wood by Haruki Murakami, 1Q84 by Haruki Murakami, The Girl with All the Gifts by Mike Carey, Station 11 by Emily St. John Mindel, any book written by Agatha Christie with Hercule Poirot Sherlock Holmes series By Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, The Girl on the Train by Paula Hawkins. I also suggest looking at Slash or Slash Books for more.
It's cool to see a variety of tastes in books. I've read some of those too. The Night Circus had a nice atmosphere, and Gone Girl was a twisty ride. Murakami's style is unique and surreal. Agatha Christie's mysteries are classic. I remember getting lost in the Sherlock Holmes stories. If you hang around Slash or Slash Books, you'll definitely find more interesting reads. Always good to explore different genres.
This needs to be higher up on this list. Redwall is one of the few things that got me into the fantasy world. Not just because it was a bunch of talking woodland creatures defending an abbey, but because of the Middle Ages feel to it. To this day, Brian Jacques remains the only author to make my stomach growl in his descriptions of the feasts laid out at Redwall Abbey. Literally the food porn of books.
I remember picking up Redwall for the first time. I was just a kid, and it really pulled me into another world. The way Jacques described the feasts was something else. I could almost smell the bread and herbs. It's funny how a book about animals can make you feel so much. Those stories stuck with me over the years. Definitely a good start to my fantasy journey.
To me, the Redwall series was the original Game of Thrones for kids. Gripping medieval action in an incredibly well-made fantasy world. And Brian Jacques was the first storyteller I encountered who really made me fear for characters' lives. I still vividly remember the heartbreak I felt when reading Martin the Warrior /S, but it really just allowed me to appreciate everything else all the more.
Yeah, the Redwall series hooked a lot of us. I remember getting lost in those books as a kid. The battles felt real, and you actually cared about the characters. I can relate to that feeling on Martin. It hit hard, but it made the rest of the journey worthwhile. A story that sticks with you like that is something special.
Admittedly, I read it because I was head over heels for a woman, who also got me to read The Little Prince, which is another fantastic book, but after reading East of Eden, it became one of my favorites of all time. There's so much to it, but what I found most profound was the way in which it showed the complexity of life through showing the way the past affects the present, and how if things had been just a little different, then the outcomes of people would be radically different. For example, imagine if the Irish family was allowed to farm the good land instead of having to settle for the crappy land. I'm describing it poorly, but it just is one of those perfect examples of all the external forces that determine our life. To me, it was humbling.
I get where you're coming from. Sometimes, a book hits differently when you're drawn in by someone else's interest, like that woman. East of Eden definitely dives into how history shapes our choices and paths. It's wild to consider how small changes in circumstances could lead to entirely different lives. It's a reminder of the unpredictable nature of existence and how we're all influenced by things beyond our control. Makes you think.
Damn how is Steinbeck so far down in this tread. But this book changed my life. Recommend to anyone in a transitional period / existential crisis type time. The character's personality and their psychology has real depth and is incredibly engaging. Goes through years and years of their lives and makes you genuinely care what happens to them the whole time. It's long but so worth it, and Steinbeck is one of the best emotimential.
I get that. Steinbeck really has a way of capturing the struggles people go through. His characters feel real, and their journeys can hit home, especially when you're dealing with your own issues. It's like you end up reflecting on your life while reading. Those long books sometimes feel daunting, but when they resonate, they're worth every page. Timshel really sums up the human experience in a profound way.
This book gave me so many emotions and left me feeling empty inside after finishing it. It's one of the few books that have compelled me to immediately start from the beginning after the end. It's ruined my outlook on Westerns as well. The typical Western can't possibly contain the amount of hopelessness and senseless violence that's even on one page of Blood Meridian. Excellent book, one of the best I've ever read, but I can't in good conscience recommend it to just anyone.
I get that. Sometimes a book hits hard and leaves you in that strange space. I had a similar experience with a novel once. Took me by surprise with its depth and darkness. Made me rethink the genre entirely. You want to share it with friends, but you know it's not for everyone. It's like it becomes personal, you know? Not just a story, but something that sticks with you.
I love Murakami. He offers a great escape when you're down, to a simple world where you can just relax and listen to great music, read fantastic books, have uncomplicated sex, eat good food, and search for lost cats and sheepman once in a while. My favorite has to be Hard-Boiled Wonderland. Had the same feel as The Castle by Kafka.
I get that. Murakami really creates a vibe that takes you out of the everyday grind. It's nice how he blends simple things with deeper themes. Hard-Boiled Wonderland does have that surreal quality, similar to Kafka. The mix of music, food, and those quirky elements like lost cats can be pretty comforting. It's all about those little moments that make you feel something, right?
Butcher, kind of funny since some of his stories were adapted to graphic novel format. Nothing comes close to the amount of effortless detail he puts into his writing. It's one thing to build a world around a character, but he's built several worlds for this character. And there's talk that a future book will deal with alternate realities. If you can't enjoy a story about a man who rides an undead T-Rex into the center of a tornado of zombies to fight off the apocalypse, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah, that guy really knows how to create some wild scenarios. Taking a character on a T-Rex to battle zombies in a tornado? That's just next level. It's not just about the action, it's the worlds he crafts. I think it's pretty cool how he's expanded it into graphic novels too. Definitely makes his stories even more engaging. You can't help but get drawn into that kind of creativity.
I just finished this book for the third time. I remember the first two times I read it when I was younger. I felt that all of the notes and ramblings had some deep meaning that related to the Navidson storyline. This time, I felt that it was basically a parody of literary analysis. However, I still love the core Navidson story.
That's interesting how perspectives change over time. I had a similar experience with an old favorite. When I first read it, I was all about the plot twists. But on the second read, I noticed a lot of the themes I missed before. It's cool to see how we grow with books. The Navidson story really does have a lot to unpack, even if the notes can feel a bit over the top.
My favorite book in high school. I remember on the forums, people were trying to understand the cryptic meaning behind a lot of stuff most people would just ignore. Like why the word house was always blue, what the sounds of the house were coming from, what symbolism did the Minotaur play, etc. It was an awesome book. I personally just thought it sounded cool that the story just starts with the journalist finding that the inside of his house was slightly larger than the outside. Really set it up.
It's funny how some books spark heavy debates. I remember my friends getting super deep into all the theories. I just liked the twist of the house being bigger inside. Felt like it set a unique vibe right away. It was less about figuring everything out for me and more about enjoying the ride. Sometimes, the simple things in a story are what really hook you in.
I knew this book was amazing when I found myself flipping through pages in the bathroom mirror with all the lights on in my house at 3 a.m. It's hard to describe exactly how effective the unconventional text is, but holy shit, I don't think I've ever been so excited/scared from reading a book before.
I get that. There's something about those late-night reads that just pulls you in. I remember reading a thriller once at 2 a.m., the kind that makes you jump at every sound. Couldn't put it down. The atmosphere is perfect for diving deep into the story. It's like you find this whole new world waiting, even if it messes with your sleep schedule a bit.
The fact that it was published online at first as a literal hypertext certainly make the book quite unique. I think the printed version does a good job of translating that aspect. Well worth the read, but if someone wants to get into it, be advised that it's a challenging read for many reasons. Also why reading it is so rewarding.
That sounds interesting. I remember when a friend tried reading a book like that. They struggled at first but kept at it. It took them weeks to finish, but they appreciated it more afterward. Sometimes, those tough reads stick with you and make you think differently. It's cool how different formats can change the experience, too.
Reading Murakami absorbs you and gives you texture and feeling and smell and these other senses you don't usually get in a book. It's erotic, but at the same time not sexual. 1Q84 may be one of the only books where I've read the description needs to get fucked really hard and felt empathy rather than arousal. There's this one description in Wind Up Bird of the guy's green necktie that I ended up reading like a dozen times before I moved on. Can't remember where it is, but I felt warmer after reading it. He has this way of describing the world around him that makes it feel both comfortable and uncomfortable at the same time. It's that blending of multiple narratives, the interweaving of character stories. It shouldn't work, but it does somehow. Anyways, if you like Murakami, you should try out Karen T. Yamashita. Tropic of Orange has a similar feel to it.
Murakami's style really hits different, doesn't it? It pulls you in with these layers that mess with your head while making you feel deeply. I relate to the green tie moment. Sometimes a small detail sticks with you. I get why the characters feel familiar yet distant. That mix can be unsettling but also comforting. I haven't tried Yamashita yet, but I'll check out Tropic of Orange. Sounds like a vibe.
This is a book that I felt like I should totally love, but didn't. I appreciated that the author was extremely good. I simply felt like it was a book that kept starting and then stopping every time it started to get interesting. I know that probably is, part of the point. It just annoyed me.
I get that feeling. You expect to get hooked, but then it just pulls back. It's like when you watch a series, and each episode ends right when things get exciting. You can respect the craft but still feel let down. It's frustrating when a book doesn't deliver on the promise of its potential. Sometimes you want that constant momentum, not a stop and go. It's a bummer when it doesn't hit the mark.
Had to scroll down way too far to find this. My first read through, my wife kicked me out of bed because I was laughing too hard. The second read through, I almost cried. The third time around, I laughed and cried. I have the gold edge copy that looks like the Bible and has an epilogue by Christopher Moore that had me in stitches. Because of him, I no longer let my wife buy dead baby toilet paper. Angel Soft.
That sounds like a memorable experience. It's interesting how some stories can hit you differently on a second or third read. The mix of laughter and tears makes it special. It's cool that a joke from a book influenced your daily life in a funny way, like the toilet paper choice. Humor can definitely change how we see the little things around us, even household items.
Wow, you really have a similar taste in books as I do. I've read close to all of what you've posted, but I'll check out the rest, especially Stiff. Not on your list, but I really like the Malaysian Book of the Fallen series by Steven Erikson, Epic Fantasy, and the Black Company series by Glenn Cook, Epic/Dark Fantasy. Also the Stars My Destination/Tiger. Tiger, by Alfred Bester, science fiction, Count of Monte Cristo in space. If you haven't read those, I would recommend you do.
Looks like we both enjoy diving into deep worlds. Stiff sounds interesting. I'll add it to my list. I've heard a lot about the Malaysian series too. It's nice to meet someone who has a similar vibe for these kinds of books. I haven't tried the Black Company series yet, but I'll check it out. Science fiction is also a favorite, so I'll add Bester's work too. Appreciate the recommendations.
I've read this, and I think I just don't get why it's considered so good. Clearly I'm wrong, since it's in practically every best of collection. Maybe his style just isn't for me. I finished it wondering why it was even written. What am I missing? I know it's based on his experiences in Dresden, and a good bit of who he hid in which characters, but I don't know. I just didn't enjoy it. I'm open to being told I'm wrong, though. So it goes.
I get that. Sometimes a book just doesn't connect. I've had friends rave about stuff I found boring. It's like everyone has a different lens. Maybe the historical context or themes didn't resonate with you. Some people love diving into deeper meanings while others just want a good story. It's cool to feel that way. Not every work of art hits everyone the same. Just keep reading, you'll find what clicks for you.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.